Okay, so last time we finished up with Moonraker. So after Moonraker, they'd really pushed the limits of the kind of silliness and over the top shenanigans they could really get away with. So they decided to go back to basics with a more gritty Bond, and the results were my favourite Roger Moore Bond, For Your Eyes Only. It still has a few silly moments, but far less than any other Moore film, and it has a harder edge. Sort of less gadgets and more back to basics kind of Connery-esque film, and it's really, really enjoyable. Now it looks stunning, has a lot of great scenery to work with, a lot of good ocean shots and underwater shots, and the colours really pop. It's a really top-notch transfer from Lowry Digital. After For Your Eyes Only, Moore was thinking about retiring, but he decided to come back for one more, as a rival company had coaxed Connery to come in and do a Bond film with them called Never Say Never Again. So Eon wanted Roger Moore to go up against that with Octopussy. Now I remember as a kid seeing both films in the theatre the same year. In fact, For Your Eyes Only, the previous film, was the first Bond film I ever saw at the theatre. And I saw through from For Your Eyes Only right through to Living Daylights at the theatre. But yeah, that year we saw Connery in Never Say Never Again, which is a remake of Thunderball, due to the rights for Thunderball being owned by another party. So a lot of people call it an unofficial Bond film. Well, it's not really an unofficial Bond film. It was a licensed Bond film. They had the rights to make Never Say Never Again. It's just not part of the ongoing Eon production of films. But anyway, Octopussy came out, and it went back to kind of the silly styles, but it managed to keep it a little fresher and a little more grounded. And what you came up with was a beautifully shot and excellently paced thrill ride. Very underrated film, Octopussy, and it is one of the better looking films in the set. Definitely one of the better looking Roger Moore films. Great colours, beautifully realised. So definitely recommend Octopussy. I've never seen Never Again. I only have the DVD of, which I showed in part one of this overview of the Bond set. Of course, it's not in the set. It's not from Eon Productions, but the Blu-ray is actually out of print. I didn't get the Blu-ray as it was it's region locked, and at the time I didn't have a region free player, but I do intend to get it if they re-release it. Now the DVD is pretty good. It has some good special features. I'll Never Say Never Again. It's much maligned, but I'm really not sure why. Connery has never been better. He's absolutely charming in the film. He actually looks far better than he did in his previous outing, Diamonds Are Forever, and he's about 10 or so years older in Never Say Never Again. The film has some of the best villains, best henchwoman, with Barbara Carrera playing Fatima Blush, and Kim Basinger is excellent as Domino, and I can't remember the name of the guy who plays Largo, but he does a great job. He's a European actor. The underwater scenes are much better than the ones in Thunderball. They don't go on forever. They're better filmed, filled with great moments. It does get a little long in the last third. It's not perfect, and there is some moments that could have been fleshed out a bit better, but they were dealing with a lot of lawsuits about what they could and couldn't use in the Bond universe from Eon during production. It's definitely hampered. The guy who plays Blofeld, a lot of his scenes ended up not making it into the final cut of the film. Anyway, he had a few scenes in the film, but apparently there's a lot more that didn't make it into the final film. But Never Say Never Again is one of my absolute favourite Bond films. Connery is excellent in it, and of the two films that came out that year, Never Say Never Again, it was the far better one for me. You would have think that was Roger Moore being done with it, but he was coaxed back to do one more with A View to a Kill. And A View to a Kill is really one of the worst Bond films. It's just terrible. So hokey. It had a lot going for it. It had Christopher Walken as the villain, Grace Jones as the sort of evil henchwoman, and Duran Duran did the song, and it's an excellent song. But the film is just so boring and so dull, and there's no oomph to it, and it has so many silly little things. The one high point for me was that people often overlook is Robert McNee from the Avengers, the British TV series Avengers. is in it, and he's really good in it. His stuff with Roger Moore at the beginning is some of the best stuff in the film. Yeah, a real failing swan song for Roger Moore. After that, enter Timothy Dalton. Now, Timothy Dalton was considered for Bond years earlier, around the same time Roger Moore turned up. Dalton himself thought he was too young at the time to play Bond, but by the time Roger Moore was finished, Dalton signed up. Now, he signed up to play Bond and was even announced as Bond, I believe, and then there was some scheduling issues with some things that he was already signed up for, and they decided to get Pierce Brosnan. But then the people who owned his contract for Remington Steele, his TV show, at the last minute commissioned some more episodes, and that would have had him being Remington Steele again for another season, which only ended up being another half season, funny enough, but that was enough for Bond, for Eon Productions to pass on Brosnan and work something out with Dalton, scheduling, and Dalton became the fourth James Bond. He did The Living Daylights, which is a pretty solid Bond film, actually. His take on the James Bond character was back more to the Ian Fleming book. He went back to the novel, didn't want to imitate anybody else, and sort of a hard, animalistic Bond. He does the best he can with the material in The Living Daylights, which is it's more of a Roger Moore vehicle and script, but they sort of adjusted it with John Glenn, the director, who had done For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy, doing The Living Daylights. Between the two of them, they came up with a slightly harder edge Bond. Now, where the set really shines is the fact that the Dalton Bonds on DVD looked terrible, very washed out, and weren't given a lot of love, as Dalton himself hasn't given a lot of love in the Bond franchise. But on Blu-ray they look brand new and they look spectacular. The sound is beefed up. They seemed so weak in the sound and visuals department on DVD, but they're a real treat on Blu-ray, and I really enjoyed his films more than ever. Living Daylights definitely came up a lot with me in the rankings, which we'll do in the final section of the overview, my final rewatch rankings, which brings us on to one of my favourite Bond films of all time, License to Kill. This is where Dalton and Glenn really perfected their sort of more hard-natured Bond film, which many people, including myself, see as a template for the Daniel Craig Bonds that would come later. It still has a few silly moments chucked in. They couldn't quite get away from that, but for the most part, it's one of the sort of grittiest and nastiest badass Bond films there is, certainly up to at least to when the Daniel Craig ones arrive. It's kind of funny how the Bond franchise started with serious with Connery, goofy and camp with Roger Moore, and then serious with Dalton, and then the Brosnan ones that are coming up next kind of go a bit silly and goofy again, and then ultra serious with Daniel Craig after that. But we'll finish it up here with License to Kill, which looks fabulous on Blu-ray. And I'll remind you that all of these films have the same special features as the Ultimate Edition DVDs, which are some really great thorough special features with commentaries and featurettes. And of course Robert McNee from View to a Kill narrates the excellent Inside Bond making of documentaries that go with all of the Bonds from Dr. No right up to License to Kill. I think that's where the last one is. I think from GoldenEye onwards they don't have those. If there's one special feature you want to check out and special features, that's the one. Really informative stuff with some great behind the scenes action. Okay, so that's it for this part. In the next part we'll probably do the Brosnans and the Craig Bonds, and hopefully by then I might have seen Skyfall as well, so fingers crossed it comes out here next week.